Hello and welcome to my little corner of the internet where I set, work towards, and document the progression of my goals. My name is Melanie and I'm so happy to have you with me here today. So if you have been following this channel, you know that one of my active goals is learning German, and I've been working towards this for quite a long time at this point. Last year, I finished the Dino Lernt Deutsch reader series, which is a compilation of books written in German intended to be for people who are learning the German language. And seeing as how I've already done a couple of book reviews on this channel, I thought that it would be great to review the series of books and let anybody who is interested in learning German or is already learning German and looking for good resources what I thought of this absolutely fantastic series. Right off the bat, I'm going to say that if you are learning German, this, in my opinion, of all the books that I have read in German, is the absolute best German learner series that you could read. It's entertaining. It has a glossary that includes vocabulary that you might not know, so there are words that are highlighted throughout the chapters, and at the end of the chapter, you can go and find translations for all of said highlighted words. And not only that, but the books become progressively harder as you read. So when you begin the book, it starts at a high A1 or a low A2 level, and by the time you finish the series, it's at about a high B1, maybe a low B2 level. It pretty much goes from an advanced beginner to a solid intermediate level, and I really think that it will help you progress your language learning in a nearly effortless way. Now, of course, there is effort, but you will enjoy the process so much that you will hardly notice yourself making that effort, if that makes sense. This is the story of a young man, Dino, who moves from Sicily, Italy, to, at first, Berlin, Germany. But in each book, he moves to a different German-speaking region, most of them being in Germany, but he also gets to visit other German-speaking countries, namely Switzerland, Austria, and Liechtenstein. In one of these books, he does return to Italy, so it's not a German region in every single one, but in 11 of the 12 books, he is in a German-speaking region. It feels like a book that you would enjoy reading, even if you weren't trying to learn German. Like, a German native speaker could pick this up, and although the vocabulary might be a little bit simple for them, I think that the story would be enjoyable for somebody who enjoys reading, whether they were learning German or if they were a native speaker. As this book follows Dino traveling throughout Germany, you get to see him not only learn about the traditions, customs, foods, and dialects of these various regions, but also find himself and his place in the modern world. Just want to give a quick warning that I did start reading these books in 2021 and finished them at the end of 2023, so I wasn't necessarily consistently reading them throughout this time, and as a result, my memory of them is not perfect, so please forgive me if I get a detail or two wrong, but of course I will do my best to give as accurate a recount as I possibly can. I also just want to give a spoiler alert. I do want to both give you my thoughts on each individual book in this series and also give like a quick summary of what happens, but I will do my best to not give anything absolutely major away. With that said, it's going to be very hard to tell you about these books without giving away some significant details, so if all you want to know is what I think of these books in general and whether it's worth reading, yes, it's worth reading, and if you want to just hear my thoughts that might contain spoilers, maybe come back after you've read the series. Also, this is a relatively new and small channel, so if you are interested in anything related to either goal setting, language learning, or German learning in itself, I would really appreciate if you would subscribe to this channel, or at the very least, give this video a like, leave comments down below letting me know your thoughts of this series or of the video itself. I'd really appreciate anything you can do to help boost the algorithm. And with that said, let's get right into the video. The first book in this series is Cafe in Berlin, and we see Dino come to Germany for the first time in his life, and he goes through the day-to-day experience and just gives a general idea of what it is like to live in Berlin as somebody who doesn't necessarily speak very much German. He is taking a German speaking course while he's there and sharing an apartment with several other foreigners who are also learning to speak German. he gets to experience various aspects of German culture and German life, and his frustrations with trying to speak German with the locals, but they always default to English with him. And I can definitely relate to that. I will say, and I can't remember if he says something about this in the book, but if I spoke Italian as my native language, I would definitely just pretend that I didn't speak English so people wouldn't default to that with me, but I digress. He doesn't have a job and he's financially struggling, which definitely becomes a bit of a theme throughout the series, and he has to call his brother and ask him for some financial help. At the end of the book, he ends up leaving Berlin and is on to his next adventure, his next destination, and that's pretty much it. There's not a whole lot of plot in this book. It's more of just an introduction to the series, an introduction to life in Germany. The focal point of this book is much more just introducing us to the character Dino himself and giving us a glimpse into what the culture of Germany is like. With that said, it's still enjoyable, but nowhere near as developed as the books we will see later in the series. The second book is Ferien in Frankfurt, which means holiday in Frankfurt. And I found it kind of funny that the first two books were in Berlin and Frankfurt, because these are actually the only two cities that I've been to in Germany, and I went to them in that order. So just a little bit of a coincidence there. So in this book, he grapples a little bit more with what he's actually trying to do with his life. He goes and stays with his brother, who is a banker in Frankfurt, and this is the same brother that gave him some money in the last book so he could continue to live as he is. In the beginning of this, he loses his luggage, which is kind of funny to me because this is a conflict we see as well in the beginning of the video German learner series Nico's Weg, as well as the other German video learner series, Jojo sucht das Glück. It's just funny that we see this trope repeated in all of these German learner series. Like, I don't know what it is and why we continue to see this happen, but it's entertaining nonetheless. Not too much happens in this one. He just kind of befriends the landlord's daughter and gets shown around this beautiful city and gets to know the landscape of the city, and then one of his roommates from Berlin comes to visit him and they go to the zoo. And that's pretty much the last we hear of his roommate, but that's neither here nor there. He complains a little bit about how his brother is working too much, which I find kind of funny because you see in this early stage, he really hasn't come to appreciate the fact that all of his brother's hard work is what allows Dino to mooch off of him in the first place. Of course, at the end of this book, he decides to leave Frankfurt and he is off to his next destination. The third book in this series is Carnival in Köln. And in this book, we see Dino finally get something of a job. It's not a real job, but more of a gig where he is babysitting for a woman's Saint Bernard. And this is the first book where we actually feel like there's something of a plot, at least in my opinion. As he's babysitting this dog, I'm not going to say exactly what happens because I don't want to give it away, but something goes wrong. It's a pretty funny scenario, not going to lie, and he has to take this dog to the vet. However, while he's in Köln, Carnival is taking place, and this is just a cultural phenomenon that he is not at all experienced with, and it turns the entire reality of his life there upside down. So as you can imagine, it's quite an adventure for him to take the dog to the vet during this time. Everybody's in costumes. It's just not at all what you would be wanting to deal with in an emergency situation. I'm glad that in this book, Dino gets a sense of responsibility and he actually gets a job and isn't completely dependent on his family as a grown man. It's okay to have a character like that in a book because people like this do actually exist, but it's nice to see him start to grow and become more responsible as the book progresses. However, it is only a small gig, and by the end of the book, he's off to his next destination. The fourth book is Momenta in München, which translates to Moment in Munich, and in this book, he goes to Bavaria, more specifically Munich, and he actually gets a real job. Now, this is not a glamorous job. It's a minimum wage job as a janitor at a movie theater, and he finds it quite boring. He slacks off a lot. He shows up late to work all the time, but it's at least a stable job that he is able to hold down for some time, although eventually his slacking off does catch up with him. In this book, he does get to experience a new side of Germany that has a totally different dialect and sense of cuisine and fashion than what he is used to, so that's fun. I definitely related to him struggling to understand the Bavarian accent and dialect, because I certainly struggle with that as well, as do many people who are learning German in the standard dialect. And it was also fun to get to see him experience Oktoberfest. Also in this book, he meets Elizabeth, who becomes his girlfriend and is a pretty significant character throughout the remainder of the series. So I think that this book is definitely where things start to pick up. It starts to have more of a plot line, and we just get to enjoy the stories more as a whole. Not to mention that the vocabulary starts to get a little more difficult at this point. Book number 5 in the series is Ahoi aus Hamburg, and obviously this one takes place in the city of Hamburg that has a lot of ports, and it's interesting. This is a very unique place to Germany because rivers connect to this part of Germany. This is a place where there is a lot of trading, a lot of receivement of goods and cargo, and also they have a pretty rich history of pirates as well, which is, it's definitely interesting because you probably don't think of pirates when you think of Germany, but there is still a town that is very rich in pirate culture, and this is it. In this book, Dino finds a job that includes free housing, and he thinks, wow, what a wonderful situation. But of course, it's not as wonderful as it seems at first. He becomes somewhat of a superintendent, where he is responsible for taking care of the homes of all of the tenants in this apartment building, which soon becomes very overwhelming. It's fun to see him make such a genuine effort to help people, but at the end he becomes overwhelmed and he goes on to his next adventure. So that doesn't last very long, but it's definitely the best job he's gotten so far, so it's nice to see him at least progress in a positive direction. It gets a little frustrating to see that this is a character who can't really find his place in life and nothing that he tries really sticks, but he's more of a journey rather than a destination sort of guy, and it's interesting to see his journey progress. Not to mention the fact that this character trait is pretty much what keeps the book going at this point, so I'm not going to complain too much, because if he wasn't like this, we wouldn't have so diverse of a story where this character gets to see nearly every region that German culture has to offer. The next book in this series is Plötzlich in Palermo, and this is the only book in the series that actually takes place in a non-German speaking region. Dino returns to Italy with his girlfriend Elizabeth to go to his brother's wedding, and yes, this is the brother who has been financially supporting him throughout a lot of the series so far. So it's nice to see his brother kind of move on with his life and leave Dino in the position where he really has to become more independent and learn to fend for himself. This book is rather interesting and covers a bit more of a heavy theme than we've seen in the past, because while this wedding is taking place, there is an incident involving a refugee, and suddenly Dino, his family, and Elizabeth are suddenly responsible for helping to smuggle a refugee back into Germany. Now, it's interesting because this is definitely illegal, so it's not that I want to support something that's unlawful, but it is sweet to see the sentiment behind the story and how they want to help somebody in need. It's also nice to see a bit of a break from the whole Dino finds a job, can't hold it down, what's he on to next theme. It's just a nice break in that, where money isn't really much of a factor, other than the fact that Dino knows moving forward after this that he's going to have to be more independent of a person. It was also sweet to see Dino's relationship with his mother. She's just a very typical Italian mother who loves him very much, and his whole family dynamic was very enjoyable. The next book on the list, number 7, is Walzer in Wien. And in this book, we see Elizabeth and Dino move to Vienna, which is in Austria. So I think this is the first time we see Dino in a country outside of Germany that is actually, in fact, a German-speaking country. They moved there because Elizabeth is inspired by their experience in the last book by helping the refugee to go and find a job that is helping with the refugee crisis. However, this is a reporting job that has her traveling, and it takes her all the way to Macedonia. So Dino is left to fend for himself and to explore the streets of Vienna and make a life for himself on his own. He's still with Elizabeth, but their relationship is a bit strained at this point since he can never see her, and her job has her working crazy hours doing very stressful and emotionally taxing work. He eventually finds himself finding a job at the Freud Museum, and I actually really enjoyed the story. I won't get too into what happens, but there is a theft while he's working, and it all resolves itself in a very funny and wholesome way. And this is the first time we see Dino find a job where his employers are generally happy with him. He's not bored by the work. He does a good job other than the one incident, and yeah, it's just nice to see him not be a mess up. Like, this is definitely more progression for his character, which, like I've said, it's really enjoyable to see him become a better person as this series progresses, because in the beginning he really is a complete bum, and it's just nice that the author didn't continue that throughout the entirety of the series. However, despite him doing well with this job, they do decide to leave Vienna and are soon off to their next destination. Book number 8 is Zurück in Zurich, and in this book we see Dino and Elizabeth go to visit her family in Switzerland. And this book is really cute. It's, once again, they go to a country that is not Germany, but it still is a German-speaking country, or at least a mostly German-speaking country. And they get to enjoy the beautiful landscapes and scenery. I mean, I've never been to Switzerland, but people who know about Switzerland knows that it is beautiful and that it is expensive. And yes, they do experience both of these factors in this book. Dino goes to purchase a watch, and he is blown away by how expensive the watches there are. But of course, it's Switzerland, they're known for their watches, so of course an expensive place that's known for their watches are gonna have expensive watches. Also, we once again see Dino faced with a new dialect that is challenging for him, and yeah, I can't blame him because I really don't understand Swiss German either. And of course, the fun part of this story is when they get locked in a safe, and don't worry, by a fun twist of events that all comes back full circle, they do find themselves freed from this safe. But it was fun to read along as the author Andre Klein had these characters go through such a classic trope. This was meant to be a vacation anyway. They are not trying to live permanently in Switzerland, so of course we are very soon off to the next destination once again. The next book is Digital in Dresden, or Digital in Dresden, and in this one we see Dino get a job, and this is once again a pretty decent job, and he is able to find some sense of independence from his brother, who is now married and trying to start a family. And he is holding down the job and doing pretty good, all while the landscape of Germany is changing as the migrant crisis escalates, and we see more and more refugees coming into Germany. And we also see many people in Germany not being very happy about this, although of course there are people in Germany who welcome it as well. We see Dino finding his place in the middle of all of this political division, and it's pretty interesting because his job being online eventually leads him to taking money for influencing the political climate. And I won't get too into that. You can read about that when you read the book. But eventually he comes to the realization, mostly through the help of his girlfriend Elizabeth when he tells her what he's doing, that his job is not very ethical and that he should leave. And in the process, he also takes one of his co-workers with him and helps him to find a job that helps this co-worker to embrace his own roots that he was feeling some shame over. So I thought it was a really wholesome book, and I definitely enjoyed this one. Of course, at the end, he is off to a new city. So in number 10, we have Schlamzel Stutgart, although this is another book where he's not holding down a job, but rather on a vacation. And in this book, he goes with Elizabeth to go to a prestigious event where her sister, who is a highly successful, I want to say scientist, but I don't actually quite remember, but she's receiving some sort of prestigious humanitarian award at an award ceremony. And they go, and Elizabeth's very Jewish mother is there, hence the Yiddish word in the title, Schlamazel, not a German word, Yiddish. But they go, and of course disaster takes place when Elizabeth's sister fails to show up to her own acceptance of the award, and her very stereotypical Jewish mother nearly has a complete meltdown when she realizes that her daughter is missing, and then the three of them go off on an adventure to try and find the sister. Now, this book was very different from the others because this book was more of like a mystery detective sort of book, and it was fun to watch Dino try to take on this detective role when he's really so clueless in so many ways. And I think it's also important to note that by this point in the series, the vocabulary is significantly more difficult than where we started off in the beginning of the series. The 11th book was Lockdown in Liechtenstein, and here we see Dino in the final of the German-speaking locations. And it's actually such a perfect place for the COVID lockdown story to take place because it's in a country that is about 62 square miles large and has less than 40,000 inhabitants. And the only people there are him, an ex-monk who likes to work on motorcycles, and a man who is pretty much chronically on the internet as an influencer. Dino is there to attend a seminar that his brother had asked him to go to because he thought that it would help Dino to find some stability in life. Now, I would have to say that this was my favorite book out of the entire series. It really got very philosophical, which I appreciated. You know, as the series went on, Dino found more of his voice, and he gets to say some thoughts here and there, often wondering what's the point of living to work when there's so much more to be experienced in life, which is definitely an interesting theme to propose for somebody who doesn't take well to doing work. But in this book, he is faced with isolation and not having the option to do very much at all, especially in a country that is so small and isolated within itself. So he gets to look at life, and also by hearing what his friend, the ex-monk, has to say, he gets to reflect a lot on having a routine, on what the purpose of life is, and so on. I also thought it was funny to see the influencer, who was like a bit of a conspiracy theorist, kind of go down the rabbit hole of just being chronically online and failing to ever go outside and touch grass and connect with himself. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-conspiracy theorist. I mean, there's definitely some conspiracies that are really out there, but to be skeptical of a government overreaching at a time where it is imposing new limitations and restrictions on what the population is allowed to do and using a crisis to justify doing so, I mean, that's perfectly reasonable in my opinion, but I'm not trying to get political in this discussion. I'm just making the point that I'm not against people who want to question what's going on in the world. However, I definitely think that it's very possible that you can get sucked into the rabbit hole to the point where you just kind of lose touch with reality and lose touch with who you are. And it's no longer a healthy questioning of reality, but rather just an obsession where you lose your sense of self. So it was definitely very amusing to see this character just completely go down the rabbit hole to the point of no return. With that said, I just want to return back to the eagle that he names Amadeus, who visits him at his window, and he feeds his snacks every day. And he just kind of builds this relationship with the eagle throughout the story. And I don't want to give too much about that away either, but that really was my favorite part, probably, of the entire series. It was just very heartwarming, and yeah, I would definitely say this was my favorite of all of the books. However, we still have one left, and that is Sturm auf Silt, which is Storm in Silt. And in this book, Dino finds his way into a group of individuals who are all sort of misfits, or people living alternative lifestyles at the very least. And of course, being the person who can't hold down a job for the life of him, he fits right in with these individuals who are just rejecting mainstream society as a whole. And he travels with them all the way to the northern island of Silt, which is, interestingly enough, mostly inhabited by rich folk who really want nothing to do with his type. But with that said, these are people who are kind of going to crash the party. They're going in a dejected state of post-COVID society to just, live it up as much as they can because society's falling apart anyway. So I definitely found this to be a fun little story where they go there. And of course, Dino ends up finding somebody who's involved in cryptocurrency, and without giving too much about the story away, he nearly destroys this man's life, but he helps him to fix the situation. And at the end, the man is very thankful to Dino and all ends well. And I don't want to give away the conclusion of the series, but I will say that it was really the perfect ending. And with that said, those are my thoughts on the book series Dino Lernt Deutsch. I'm definitely excited to move on to more advanced books from Andre Klein. I cannot recommend this series enough for people who are learning German, specifically at like an advanced beginner level. I think that's the perfect time to read these books, and it will take you to a more advanced level as you continue through the series. If you got to this point of the video, thank you so much for sticking by and hearing everything I have to say. If you've read this series before, I would love to hear your thoughts on it in the comments below, or if you haven't, I'd still like to hear your thoughts. Let me know if you plan on reading this series for yourself, or what you're doing to learn German for yourself already. Thank you so much for watching, and if you haven't already, please subscribe, like, comment, all the things that help boost the algorithm. I greatly appreciate it, and of course, I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!